Hi, welcome to Forward Community Church Children's Ministries. Today we're going to have our last story from the Old Testament. Babylon had been the country that captured Israel and took them back. There had been prophecies that Israel would return to their homeland, that after God had basically punished them for all of their sins that they had done, and He had rested the land for the time that they didn't rest the land, that He would bring them back to Jerusalem and that He would begin to restore them as a nation. There was a very specific amount of time given. So when it was fulfilled, God began speaking to the prophet Nehemiah, and he was a person that was placed in a high place of importance with the Persian kingdom. That's where our story picks up today. Persia, a powerful nation, ruled the world, and King Artaxerxes ruled Persia. That made him the world's mightiest ruler. One of the king's important helpers was a Jewish man named Nehemiah. His job was to taste the king's food to protect the king from possible poisoning. The king was very important, and he had a rule that you were not to come in front of the king like sad. You know, the king doesn't want to be dragged down all the time by everybody else's problems. He has his own kingdom to run and problems. So what happens next was actually kind of a risk for Nehemiah. God, I believe, was directing things and ordained this. One day, Nehemiah came before the king with a very sad face. The king wanted to know what was wrong. "O king, may you live forever. I'm sad because the city where my fathers are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been burned." Nehemiah was talking about Jerusalem, which had been destroyed many years before. King Artaxerxes asked, "What is it you would like?" "Let me go to Jerusalem so I can build it," Nehemiah pleaded. King Artaxerxes kindly agreed and gave Nehemiah official letters to protect him as he traveled. God was working on the king's heart. He didn't have to do this. He placed Nehemiah in a position of authority, responsibility. He was safeguarding the king's life, so he was very close to the king. He gave him a letter to keep him safe. That way, if officials said, "Hey, why are you here? You know, what are you doing traveling with this group of people?" He could show them the letter, and it was from the king himself, and they wouldn't bother him. He also gave him some other letters and provided supplies for him to rebuild the city. The king helped even more. He gave Nehemiah a letter for Asaph, the keeper of the king's forests. Asaph was ordered to provide as much timber as Nehemiah asked for to build the city wall. When Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, he gathered the city officials and said, "We're in trouble here. The city is in ruins, and the gates are burned. Let's start rebuilding." He told them that the king Artaxerxes, and most importantly of all, God, was on their side. Jerusalem had been completely destroyed because of their sin many years before. Their walls that used to protect the city were all broken down. Walls are a sign of physical protection. Wild animals, enemies can't just sneak in if there's a wall around them. It's also a sign of spiritual protection. God sets up walls around our lives to protect us from enemies sneaking in. So it was a very important symbolism. Nehemiah's faith and enthusiasm must have inspired the people. They agreed, saying, "Let's rebuild." Nehemiah told each family which piece of the wall they should fix, but not everybody agreed to rebuild the wall. A man named Sanballat and his two friends, Tobiah and Geshem, were not Jewish, and they didn't want the wall rebuilt or the gates fixed. As the work went on, Sanballat became very angry. He and his friends mocked the Jews. Tobiah said, "When they're finished building that puny wall, one little fox will make it crumble." Nehemiah didn't answer. Instead, he prayed that God would deal with them. When their mocking insults didn't have any effect, they plotted together to fight against Jerusalem and cause as much trouble as they could. Again, Nehemiah prayed for God's help. He also placed a guard day and night so they wouldn't be taken by surprise. They were under threat of attack. Their enemies had the strength with no wall to take them and destroy the city again and kill them. So they got worried. They were also worried that while they're working on the wall and, kind of focusing on what they're doing, the enemies are going to come and attack them. It says that they would work with one hand and they would hold a spear or a sword with their other hand, ready to fight back. And that's how they worked on the wall, ready to fight against their enemies at any time. The Jews worked so hard they were getting weary. Some became afraid that the enemy would come and kill them while they were still working. Still, Nehemiah wouldn't stop the project. He put guards around the workers and reminded them that God was on their side, and God is more powerful than any enemy. Nehemiah tried to be a good example. King Artaxerxes had made him governor of Jerusalem with the right to demand food and money from the people. but he didn't do it. He just worked hard alongside the people as they rebuilt the wall. He used his own money to buy food. So the work I'm doing, the work God's called me to do, is way more important than all of that. He worked off of his own resources. He bought his own food, he paid for his own needs, and didn't burden the people. Finally, the people finished the wall, and only the doors had to be put into the main gates. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem heard that there wasn't a gap in the walls anymore, they planned to harm Nehemiah. They sent messages for Nehemiah to meet them at a place called Ono, but Nehemiah knew they were trying to trick him out of the city so they could harm him. He wrote back telling them that he wouldn't leave the work to go visit them. Finally, it's almost done, and they decide, okay, we need to get rid of this guy. What else can we do? So they try to trick him into coming out where they can catch him and kill him, and maybe then the work will stop, because they didn't want to see Jerusalem as a nation and strong again. The wall was finally finished, and Nehemiah set guards to protect it. He also made a rule that the gates should not be opened until well after the sun came up. Through the night, they were to be shut and barred. Now that the city was safe, many Jewish exiles from many different parts of the world returned to Jerusalem. Nehemiah must have been very happy that he had finished the job God gave him to do, in spite of all the obstacles. He stayed on in Jerusalem and helped the people to always obey God. They believed Nehemiah and they tried to follow. It took a lot of work to rebuild that wall, and then God began to prosper them. They saw that the city of Jerusalem, which represented the heart of their country, was rebuilt, and it was safe from attack again. And they began coming back, and God began blessing and raising up Jerusalem again. That's the end of our Bible stories through the Old Testament. Basically, going forward, we don't have a lot till Jesus comes. And there's even, after the prophet Malachi, about a 300-year gap where no prophecy comes to the people of Israel. They just kind of exist in what they had before. Well, thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time. God bless.